Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're sailing right into a huge topic, really one of history's biggest gambles, state-sponsored maritime exploration. We're going to try and unpack what drove whole nations to pour resources into just sailing off into the unknown. And we can start with that famous line, often linked to Columbus, right? You can never cross the ocean unless you have the courage to lose sight of the shore.
It sounds inspiring, yeah. But the reality, courage wasn't really the main currency. What you actually needed was, well, a massive amount of state backing. Think ships, crew, supplies. Enough for maybe a year out there. Forget courage, you needed serious capital.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to dig into why powerful states, Spain, Portugal, England, France, why they funded these incredibly expensive trips. What methods did they use, and what were the immediate global consequences? We know the basic drivers: economics, empire building, religion.
And that state funding is key. You just couldn't do it otherwise, not initially. Think about Columbus in 1492. Isabella and Ferdinand footed the bill. These voyages were just too big, too risky for, a regular merchant. The state had to be involved, not just for the launch, but to claim whatever was found. It cemented their power, their control over resources.
Okay, let's dive into the money first, because that really seems to be the engine here. And to get why states took this gamble, we need to talk about the main economic idea floating around back then, especially by the 17th century: mercantilism.
Right, mercantilism. It's sort of the ultimate argument for a government getting heavily involved in the economy. The basic idea: a country's wealth, its power, was measured by how much gold and silver it physically possessed. It's a finite pie, basically. For us to get richer, someone else has to get poorer.
So if gold equals power, how did they actually put that into practice? How did they make sure gold flowed in and not out?
Through really strict policies. Maximize exports, sell your stuff abroad for gold. And minimize imports, don't buy foreign stuff if you can help it. Slap on tariffs, make it expensive. Keep the precious metals inside your borders.
Which means the state has to be involved at every level, right? Managing trade, enforcing rules, and crucially, finding new stuff overseas resources, raw materials, so they wouldn't have to spend their gold buying it from rivals.
And that loops us back to the trade problem they faced initially. Those Italian city-states like Venice and Genoa, they had a death grip on European trade with Asia. Spices, silks, tea. They controlled the routes, they controlled the prices.
So Spain, Portugal, France, England.
Mm-hmm.
They were basically hemorrhaging money to the Italians. They desperately needed another way, direct route. So the core goal became finding that all-water path to Asia, and maybe, just maybe, finding new gold and silver along the way.
And when you look at who really got the ball rolling, it's Portugal. I mean, think about it. Tiny country stuck next to powerful Spain. Where could they expand? Only outwards onto the sea. That necessity really pushed their innovation in sailing.
And that starts with Prince Henry the Navigator, doesn't it? Roughly 1394 to 1460. He wasn't just a royal name. He was actively funding expeditions down Africa's west coast.
Yeah, Henry had two main goals: find a sea route east, around Africa, and get direct access to African gold, cutting out the middlemen. But, and this is crucial, his expeditions also kicked off the large-scale sea importation of enslaved Africans. It shifted the whole dynamic from the older overland routes and massively increased the scale. A really dark chapter.
Things moved fast after that. You have Bartholomew Diaz making it around the Cape of Good Hope in 1488. He proved it was possible, even though his crew basically forced him to turn back.
Right, fear of mutiny. But then, just 10 years later, 1498, Vasco da Gama goes even further. He actually reaches India, claims territory, and really blows open the Indian Ocean trade for Portugal.
And this is where Portugal's strategy gets interesting. They develop what historians call the trading post empire. They knew they couldn't conquer vast lands like Spain would later try to do. They just didn't have the numbers.
Exactly. So instead, they focused on controlling key points. Little fortified outposts like strategic toll booths on the maritime highways.
Hormuz on the Persian Gulf in 1507, Goa in India by 1510, and the big one, Malacca, controlling the straits there, in 1511.
And getting Malacca was brutal. Admiral Afonso de Albuquerque, well, the sources are pretty stark. He was ruthless. Apparently sent back strings of ears as proof of conquest. It shows this wasn't just about trade deals. It was about enforcing control, often violently, to secure that state-backed monopoly.
Monopoly is the key word there, isn't it?
Yeah.
They wanted total control over the spice trade. They forced ships trading in their zones, say between Malacca and Hormuz, to buy permits. No permit, you're a pirate, essentially.
But that system had cracks, Portugal was ultimately a small country trying to police half the world. Not enough ships, not enough people, corruption creeping in.
Right, it was stretched too thin. And eventually, competitors showed up. The Dutch grabbed Malacca in the 1620s. They wanted that spice trade too. And the English, with their growing naval power, started pushing Portugal out of South Asia, focusing on India themselves.
So while Portugal's model starts to weaken, Spain's is taking a very different path, fueled by something even more desirable than spices: gold and silver.
Spain, of course, had backed Columbus, which really sparked wider interest. But their huge maritime achievement, sponsoring Ferdinand Magellan. He died en route in the Philippines in 1522, sure. But his fleet completed the first trip around the globe, changed everything about understanding the planet's scale. And the Philippines itself became central for Spain in Asia. They annexed it, pushed hard on converting Filipinos to Christianity, and Manila. That became their key trading city in the Pacific.
But here's a fascinating bit. For years after Columbus, Spain was actually pretty disappointed. They weren't finding much gold. They were seriously considering pulling the plug on the whole exploration thing. What changed everything, what really rekindled interest, was encountering the Aztec and Inca empires. Complex societies, yes, but crucially, sitting on vast reserves of gold and, even more significantly, silver.
That discovery just supercharged everything for the Spanish state. And they also figured out quickly that the land itself could be hugely profitable. Grow cash crops like sugar, tobacco,
Yeah.
using forced labor. First, enslaved Native Americans, and then, horrifically, millions of enslaved Africans shipped across the Atlantic.
But for understanding state power and the global economy, you have to look at American silver. It became the linchpin. Silver dug up in Mexico, Peru, Potosi, loaded onto these huge, heavily defended Spanish ships, the galleons, and sailed across the Pacific.
Destination: Manila. That was the exchange point. Europeans traded this American silver for Asian luxury goods, silks, porcelain, spices. This is the moment the global economy really becomes, well, global.
And the effect on China was massive. China basically soaked up this silver. It became their primary currency. Which meant, think about it, by the early 1600s, the entire global financial system kind of revolved around these Spanish galleons, hauling silver from the Americas to Asia. The data showing silver imports into Spain just skyrockets between the 1500s and 1660s. It was the ultimate state prize.
Okay, so Spain's dominating the South and the Pacific with silver. Meanwhile, their rivals, France, England, the Netherlands, they're still obsessed with finding a shortcut to Asia. This idea of the Northwest Passage, a route through or around North America. It would be faster, cheaper, if it existed.
It turned out to be a dead end, mostly, but the search itself, that led to completely different kinds of colonies, each with its own state strategy. Take the French.
France backed guys like Jacques Cartier in 1535, exploring the St. Lawrence River. Later, Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec in 1608. They realized, hey, maybe North America isn't just a roadblock. Maybe there's value here. Furs, mainly.
And the French model was pretty different from the Spanish, right? Less about conquest and settlement, more about trade. They built relationships, often partnerships, with Native American groups to get furs, better relations generally because they weren't initially demanding huge swaths of land.
Yeah, that's a key point. French settlers didn't arrive in massive numbers wanting farms. They were traders, explorers. So New France grew really slowly in terms of European population. By the mid-1700s, maybe 70,000 Europeans compared to like a million in the English colonies down south.
Now, the English, they were kind of late to the party. John Cabot claimed some land way back in 1497, but England just didn't have the sea power then. For a while, their main strategy was basically state-sponsored piracy, unleashing privateers, the Sea Dogs, to raid Spanish ships.
But the game changer was 1588, the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Suddenly, England is a major naval power. The state could now realistically back colonies, not just raids.
And boom, Jamestown, Virginia, 1607. The first successful English colony, backed by the crown. And their model, very different from the French. It was about permanent settlement, clearing land, large-scale agriculture, especially tobacco, which meant displacing Native Americans.
Finally, you've got the Dutch. They were laser-focused on trade efficiency. In 1609, the Dutch East India Company, which was like a state within a state, massively powerful and government-backed, hired Henry Hudson. He was also looking for that Northwest Passage.
He sailed up the river that now has his name, realized it wasn't the route to Asia, but his voyage gave the Dutch a claim to the Hudson Valley and, crucially, Manhattan Island. That's where they established New Amsterdam, present-day New York City.
And New Amsterdam became this vital, state-supported trading hub. Perfectly placed, really. Furs coming down from the north, tobacco coming up from the English colonies, all funneling through there to Europe. The Dutch showed you didn't necessarily need a vast land empire. Controlling a few key ports could give you immense economic leverage.
So putting it all together, you see these core drivers: money, power, religion, technology, they all combine, but they lead to very different state-backed empire models. Portugal's string of forts, Spain's silver-fueled conquest empire, France's fur trade network, and the English and Dutch focusing on settlement and strategic commercial hubs.
What's undeniable is how this whole period just completely rewired the world map and the global economy. Power shifted away from the Mediterranean. It became truly global, built on silver, state power, and the movement of commodities, spices, sugar, tobacco, and tragically, the forced movement of millions of people.
It's the ultimate result of those initial state gambles, isn't it? But it makes you think about the what-ifs, especially regarding government choices. We've only talked about European states choosing expansion.
Right, but decades before Columbus, China had its own incredible period of state-sponsored exploration. Admiral Xi voyages.
Exactly. Xinhu's fleets were enormous, far beyond anything Europe had at the time. But then, after his last voyage around the 1430s, the Ming Dynasty just stopped. The state decided to pull back from maritime expansion.
They literally turned inward, dismantled the fleets, just decades before the Portuguese, backed by their state, show up on China's coast around 1514, demanding trade access.
So here's the thought to leave you with. Imagine if China, with its superior resources and technology at that moment, had chosen to continue its state-sponsored voyages instead of retreating. Just as the European states were starting to push outwards, how different might our world look today? That choice, that divergence in state policy, really did shape the next 500 years. Something to ponder after we lose sight of this particular shore.